a meeting of the Neighborhood and Community Development Standing Committee. This will be followed by a meeting of the Economic Development and Finance Standing Committee.
This evening. We'd like to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Neighborhood and Community Development Standing Committee. Public comment is welcome on any item that comes before the committee. Anyone wishing to speak on any item on the Standing Committee agenda may do so when that item is up for discussion. You'll come to the podium in the center of the room and you'll have up to 5 minutes to make your comments. We also ask that for accurate recording and broadcast purposes, everyone present speak as directly as possible into a microphone when they are presenting. So, get my agenda up here, get back to the beginning. I believe we have roll call first, please.
Roll call. Bynum?
Here.
Walters?
Here.
Murguia? Townsend?
Present.
Burrows? McKiernan.
Here. And I'd like to thank Commissioner Townsend for phoning in so that we could have the meeting tonight, and Commissioner Bynum for agreeing to step in at the last minute and help us reach quorum tonight. There were no revisions to the agenda as originally published, and so our first item of business is approval of our Standing Committee minutes from the October 29th, 2018 meeting.
Move for approval. Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve those minutes as submitted. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Those minutes are approved as submitted, and I just realized I'm looking on the wrong agenda, so let me get the correct one up here. That brings us then to the first item on our committee agenda, which is land bank business, so I'll turn this over to Mr. Slaughter.
Good evening and Happy New Year.
Thank you.
We'll get started. We have quite a few items tonight. First, we're going to talk about applications. We have 8 applications. They're all property acquisitions. And as usual, all applicants are current on their taxes and have no current code violations. First is 2441 and 2443 South 12th Terrace. That is, there are 2 parcels here. And the applicant is Mr. Lugo at 2437 South 12th, and he had previously purchased this last year in November. It was another land bank property. And we have 1612, 1614, 1620, 1628, 1630, and 1632 South Bethany Street that are all outlined here. And the applicant is Mark O'Brien at 1640 South Baltimore, and this is also additional property that the O'Briens have purchased out of the land bank. The advisor board did recommend approval and forwarding these to the Board of Trustees for final approval, and that is our ask tonight.
So go back to the South Bethany. So these are adjacent properties then. It looks like there's a road that might be platted in there, but they are effectively adjacent to the applicant's current property.
Correct. There is a tiny part here that does touch.
Okay.
But yes, it looks like there is a platted, or at least at one point, a platted alley, street that just never got developed.
Does any member of the committee have a question or a comment for Mr. Slaughter about these applications? Commissioner Bynum.
Chris, do you happen to know, with the current property and the added land bank properties, what's the acreage total that we could be looking at there?
I mean, I can give you what the proposed request is. Maybe that'll gauge how much the other is.
It looks like the applications are for yard expansion.
No, they're all property acquisition. I would guesstimate that this block here is about 3 acres.
Okay.
So if we think there's another 3 here, another 3 here, maybe 6, and I want to say that was 4 or 5, so, you know, you're talking maybe combined over 20.
Commissioner Walters?
Chris, we have had conversation in the past when we have an applicant that wants several parcels, that we ask for some sort of indication of their intent to develop or what they plan to use land for. Do you have any idea on that?
That was what I was commenting on. The applications say yard extension / preserve.
Preserve is probably the best word for this. The applicants are in attendance tonight, if you'd like them to address.
Absolutely. If they wouldn't mind, just come forward, and if the green light is on, you might want to actually pull that microphone down and set it on the surface of the podium. That way it'll pick you up better.
Good?
Perfect.
Okay.
Have to get that close. It'll be good.
If
If you could go ahead and, just for the record, give your name and your address so that we have it in the record.
my name is Mark A. O'Brien, 1640 South Baltimore Street, Kansas City, Kansas. I've been a lifelong resident of this property. I've been running those hills for nearly 60 years now. And the sole intention is just to preserve and have a legacy for my sons. There's no intention on building or developing any of this property.
And I'm Tammy O'Brien, and I live at his address. And it's sentimental to us. It goes back maybe 3 generations in our families. My mom grew up in those woods and played in those hills, just like we did. It's just sentimental.
As I remember those properties, there's quite a hillside there, isn't there?
Yeah,
Very
it's
much.
intractable.
You could
Okay.
do rock
You
climbing.
couldn't develop it
Yeah, it's not developable.
without major expense.
Yeah.
So the only concern that I would ever have about a large expanse of property like that is if you have any intent of clearing those trees, since they effectively stabilize that hill.
Oh,
No.
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 Okay,
We've been through that before.
It's gonna stay just the way it
Right.
is.
perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, appreciate it. Any other questions from the committee? If not, we would entertain a motion for the applications as submitted.
Move to approve all applications.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve the applications as submitted. Any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Roll call. Bynum,
Aye.
Walters,
Aye.
Townsend,
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye. Thank you very much. Those are all approved as submitted, and anyone who has a land bank application can follow up with Mr. Slaughter after our meeting for next steps. Mr. Slaughter, item number 2, an update.
Well, actually, next we're going to talk, I'll give the 2018 conveyance report, and then we'll go into the updates.
Thank you. If I only could read an agenda.
Last year, the land bank, we sold / transferred 124 properties. That generated over $144,000 in revenue. Of those 124, 67 were yard extensions, 21 property acquisitions, 35 were related to the rehab program, and we did have 1 transfer. So a pretty good year, pretty on par with what we've been averaging over the last 3 or 4 years. And then I just wanted to mention some of the kind of goals or, that we're striving for in 2019 is, obviously a continuation of keeping the rehab program very strong and vibrant. And then I put strategic marketing of properties. We've had some discussions in the past about what's the best way to go out and really market to developers, single-family builders. We've had some key upgrades to some of our systems that are finally getting in place. And we'll probably have more of an update in upcoming months as we look to improve the website. We will go back to an interactive map that hopefully will link to our application page and provide more information for the public. But just a couple of the things that we're majorly will be focusing on in 2019.
So when you say strategic marketing, are you more thinking about potential redevelopers or? Correct.
One of the things we want to focus on are maybe some key areas that we'd really like to focus on developers. I know a couple months ago we put the whole Northeast area on hold, and we would come back with some strategies. We still plan on doing in a couple months.
Okay.
But it'd be stuff in line with that we feel maybe these areas are best served to be marketed for large-scale development. Here's some areas that may be more focused on infill housing. And then maybe some recommendations on areas that maybe aren't going to be forecast that direction, and those are the ones we should try to focus on, a yard extension or a property acquisition, that type of stuff. So we'll have more information as the year comes, but just wanted to give you guys an idea of kind of where we're going to be focused for in 2019.
Excellent, thank you.
A question, if I could.
Sure.
Are we able to keep that $144,000 within the land bank?
No.
I was hoping the answer would be yes, and that we could use that money.
Well, and that's been a conversation we've had in the past about how to best use that money to effectively seed and reseed land bank operations.
Accelerate the whole program.
Right.
Okay.
Commissioner Townsend?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Walters is going down the right money road. As I looked at and listened to the plans for next year, my question right now is on the reverse side, do you need, Mr. Slaughter, you anticipate needing additional funds for anything to keep the program going or to do things in a better, different way than may have been done in the year past?
I would say yes. I don't have a figure in mind. For example, we have a couple commercial properties on Quindaro and Brown that will probably need some serious investment if we want to keep the buildings viable. One has a roof that's almost pretty much completely caved in, and some of the just estimates we've gotten have been pretty astounding. So yeah, any kind of resources, whether they're additional help or finance, we would definitely be interested in that.
I remember.
Well,
this.
I'm just.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. This is hard to do a little bit with the delay, but I'm just thinking now would be the time if your department has a particular course of action in mind that may be similar or different, to maybe come back to us with that. Now, you mentioned commercial properties. Are we looking then, it sounds like, just to maintain them, or as in the rehab for residential, are we looking to turn those properties over to someone? What's the thought at the current time with those?
With what we generated last year, I don't know if that would be enough for us to turn around and add additional resources to help existing rehabbers, or to, like I said, put into the two buildings that we still think are pretty key components to the revitalization of the Northeast area. It's something that we'll definitely give more thought to, and I'll talk with management about you know, how we can best relay any kind of resources we may need to ask for in the future.
Okay, I just wanted to kind of put that out there now. I guess it's definitely not too early to be thinking along the money lines and your budget needs. Thank you.
Ms. Stephen?
Yeah, so the land bank has a working group that's been established in the last couple of months, and we are working through a whole litany of recommendations that we plan to be bringing forward in conjunction with the SOAR program and Neighborhoods Up over the next, you know, few months of this year. So I think what you're going to see is us kind of retooling a few different things and trying to get a better handle on how Chris's work and Catherine's work can integrate well into the commission goals and to the neighborhood goals that we have. So more to follow on that, but we've had a couple of meetings and we got another one scheduled for the first part of February, and a lot of cleanup to do.
Thank you.
And this conveyance report was for information only, so.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll get into those updates. Back in November, you guys approved a hold area from 10th Street to 7th, Jerome down to Reynolds. So we wanted to give an update on that. I know we were asked to bring back some additional information. I will say, because of the weather we experienced over the weekend, we did have some out-of-town people that were not able to make it in today. But I'll speak on some high points, and we can have a discussion, or if additional information is needed, or we can come back next month with that too. The program is called 42 and 24. Again, there's the project area. Our main partner in this is the Greater Pentecostal Temple with Bishop Donaldson. He has a vision of, you know, in simplistic terms, is building 24 houses in that area in the next 24 months. They also, as we mentioned earlier, it was a 5-year time frame. But they are also interested in rehabs in the area. Unfortunately, we don't have any available. So hopefully with upcoming tax sales, we'll be able to work with him and his group on that. But a lot of this is going to be funded through, I believe, his foundation. So, you know, again, I wish some of the key components could have been here. But we're excited about it. We think this is a project that once it gets going, we can see some ripple effects that go in all directions, and also hopefully be something that the land bank can sit there and work with fellow, you know, future developers as presenting other areas throughout the county where the land we're already holding, the assets that we have, can be put to good use.
And I was part of a group that entertained Bishop Donaldson and his potential partners, or now partners, when they first floated this idea, and I certainly supported the hold area, and I support this project. For those of you who don't know, Bishop Donaldson's church is the yellow horizontal rectangle that's pretty much right in the middle of the black square. So right there, that's where his church is, and he has a great vision for renovating, revitalizing the neighborhood around his church, and found some investors who are willing to invest in both new and rehab, with an idea toward helping repopulate the neighborhood and keeping housing affordable for folks in the neighborhood as well. And this is what we would call the Riverview neighborhood area, and it is one of our more challenged neighborhoods in the 2nd District, or really all of eastern Wyandotte County. And it's really exciting that these investors really do believe that they can do, as they say, 42 rehabs or builds, combination, in 24 months. And that would be enormously beneficial for the city and for the district. So I'm glad to hear that they are moving further along in their process.
Okay, and again, that was
No
just
snowstorms next month.
That again was just another for informational purpose. So
Thank you.
the last thing we have is the rehab program update. Kind of change things around a little bit. So we'll start presenting this kind of in a graph form. That way you can see the certain trends that are following. This first slide is the number of houses that we've gotten from the tax sale. Now again, we only have 3 tax sales a year, but I think the key component to realize is in the April sale of 2018, we received 14 houses. The August sale, we received 11, and the December sale, 7. And maybe my months are off. I think this, I'm sorry, this first, the 14 was the December 2017 sale. This was the April, and then that is the August. We're in the process of getting houses from the December sale, and that looks at a high mark of maybe being 5. So the good thing is the tax sales are being successful. We're generating a lot of revenue. We're getting a lot of properties off the delinquent tax roll. However, we're also having a lot of bidders at the sale, and you know, we're not in a position to bid. We can only take what is not bid on, or ones that are bid on, the people don't come by the deadline and pay. So I don't want to say this is troubling, but we definitely would like to see that number going in a different direction, to meaning we have more inventory for our rehabbers.
But while I appreciate a market for the rehab, we could also look at this as saying that if an increasing number of people are redeeming their back taxes and are caring for their properties, we get the same outcome.
Correct.
We also get the same outcome if people purchase the houses at land bank and rehab them.
Correct.
At our program.
Well, that's true too.
One of the other things that our delinquent revenue division is working on with a SOAR program is a structure-only sale for next year, where we push as many structures through the process so that we get more structures through the program instead of lots. I mean, Chris, I think, has received quite a few more lots this year, and wanting to clear those structures so that they get shook loose either way, where there's someone from the private side handling them, or they end up in a rehab program, but they're not sitting, falling apart. So that's one of our ideas that we'll be bringing back to you.
Kathleen?
So I did want to point out that although, you know, the tax sales have resulted in a lot of people coming forward and bringing their, or setting up, you know, working towards meeting their tax obligation, there are a significant number of those that they're just getting set up on a budget plan, right? A payment plan. They're not paying up 100%. And the judge orders that, sets up the payment plan through the court, and then if they miss 3 payments, then they go back before the judge, right? And the judge has been pretty lenient. So it's not we're collecting all of this back revenue. It's getting spread out over time with under budget plans.
What's the time frame of the payment plan typically set up from the beginning? 1 year, 5 years?
You know, I don't know the specifics on that. My guess is it's a case-by-case basis, but I'm not 100% sure. Do you know?
Alyssa?
I don't have that answer, but what I can tell you is staff is working in delinquent real estate very closely with Treasury now to find out when people miss, so that we can put them back into the sale as quickly as possible. Because what would happen in the past is if they paid up 1 month, we wouldn't get them back into the rotation for years. So we are working harder on that so that it's not something that delays their ability to avoid taxes for years. So we've gotten more sophisticated in how we're handling that between Treasury and delinquent real estate. She is right. The judge is very benevolent in how he works with folks. And that continues to be a challenge when we see example like Sour Castle again and again, or one that actually doesn't pay, that gets on a payment plan and then gets on another payment plan and gets on another payment plan, where you go years and you haven't gotten anywhere. Right. So it's a challenge, but we're doing everything we can on our side to make it difficult for folks to avoid paying us.
So of course, from a Treasury's perspective and from a collection perspective, we would prefer there weren't any payment plans. So just so you know.
Okay, the next slide is showing the growth of our contractors that are taking part in our program. This does include both tiers. We have tier 1 and tier 2 now, but we are steadily growing the interest in the program, and we look to continue that trend. The next is just been the total number of properties that we've had in the program. You see we're a little bit all over the board. And that kind of reflects two things, is maybe we had a good tax sale, or maybe we had a sale where we got a small number. And it also may say that we got a number, but a lot of the stock number, none of the rehabbers really wanted to turn around and take a shot on that. That's why tier 2 was created. We are to the point, if they go through our process and we receive no offers, we'll accept an offer as low as $1 for them. So again, just on what we were speaking in, the number of houses with no offers, this is a direction I'm glad to see, is that the inventory is going down, and I believe we are sitting at 33, and again, we'll just continue to keep working to show as many houses as we need to the rehabbers, get out in the community and keep promoting the program, and hopefully that's a direction we'll continue to see going down. This is the number of demos that have been completed. We are currently sitting at, I believe, 22. So even though we are in a position compared to when we started, we do show all houses, whether we recommend them for demo, unless it's just an emergency that needs to come down. And we have had a couple rehabbers take a couple and rehab those for us. So. And this is the number that we are recommending. I believe we're sitting at 14 that are on the list right now. And again, that's based on staff's recommendation that there's just too many problems or they're in a dangerous condition. These are the number of rehabs that are currently underway. I believe we're currently sitting at 30. So, we hopefully will start to get this number down as we get more completed. These are the ones that are waiting closing. A majority of the time that's spent on this has just been the rehabbers that are requesting title insurance. This has been averaging anywhere from about 3 to 4 weeks. We're constantly talking with them about ways we can speed that up, but sometimes it just takes a little bit longer based on the history of the property. These are the houses completed. We're sitting at 25. Soon after this information, we have 3 more to update that have been completed. And occasionally we will get a property in our hands that after it comes to the land bank, then the old owner will maybe petition the court to try to get the property back. And we've had a couple instances where we have gotten the property, but there's people in it and we've had to go through the eviction process. So right now we currently have none. We'd like to keep it that way. In speaking with legal, we have noticed, or we have been told that a lot of people in this situation are starting those proceeds before they're actually deeded to us. So when we know of it up front, we just tell them don't deed it over to us until it's decided. And then if it is still going to come to us, we can take it at that point. So compared to the one slide showing this kind of a trend, is that something that we want to continue, bring into the meetings, go back to the simple information? We're happy to do it either way. Okay. So now let's talk about the 3 houses that have just been completed. 1833 North 29th Street. This was a tax sale 336 property. The minimum bid at the time was over $16,000. Took the rehabber 7.5 months. Back in January of 18, it was appraised at almost $19,000, and it's currently listed for $90,000. And the same rehabber also did 4928 Blue Lane, again a 336 tax sale property, little lower minimum bid of about 3,600, took roughly the same amount of time. This had a higher appraised value, just a little bit over 41,000, and again it's currently listed for 90. And the last one, which was just completed on Friday, this was in tax sale 338. The bid was a little bit over 7,000. This took about 8.5 months. It was appraised at a little over 5,000, and it's currently planned to be listed. They haven't just got to that point, but one of the things we plan on doing in either March or April, once the appraiser rolls out the 2019 values, we'll put together some sort of comparison of the increase in value. I think we're also working with SOAR and the Knowledge Office on the effects these houses are having in just the neighborhoods as well. So we'll be bringing that here probably in the next couple months. But that's all I had planned for tonight, so unless there's any other questions.
I didn't recognize 239 South Mill without the giant tree in the front yard, so that's a transformative change on that particular block because the tree used to shield the entire house from being viewed from the street. Very nice. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Mr. Slaughter? Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That is the last item of business on the agenda for the Neighborhood and Community Development Standing Committee. So we will adjourn that meeting. We'll give BPU Board Member Bryant just a moment to make it up to the table here, and then we will convene Economic Development and Finance. This meeting of the Economic Development and Finance Standing Committee. Once again, public comment is welcome on any item that comes before the committee. Anyone who wishes to speak on any item on the Standing Committee agenda may do so when that item is up for discussion. You'll come to the podium in the center of the room and you'll have up to 5 minutes to make your comments. And again, for accurate recording and broadcast purposes, we ask that everyone present please speak as directly as possible into a microphone. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Bynum?
Here.
Bryant?
Here.
Walters? Here. Murguia? Townsend?
Present.
McKiernan?
Here.
Burrows?
There were no revisions after this agenda was originally published, so our first item of business is our Standing Committee minutes from October 29th, 2018.
Move to approve.
There's a motion and a second to approve those minutes as submitted. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Those minutes are approved as submitted. That takes us to our committee agenda. We have 3 items on the committee agenda tonight. Item number 1 is a resolution regarding a public hearing to consider the adoption of a redevelopment project plan for Project Area 1, and that is presented tonight by Catherine Carter.
Good evening, Catherine Carter, Interim Director of Economic Development. I'm actually going to ask for a hold on this item until next month. We have a update of a market study that is scheduled to be completed by the end of this month, and we figured if we're going to present to you, we might as well have the absolute most up-to-date numbers. So I figured we will wait until the first week of February, if that is okay with you all.
So I'll turn to legal and ask, can they simply withdraw that, or do we have to actually take action to hold it over to our next meeting?
I think the committee just votes to hold it over. That'd be
okay, so in that case, we would need a motion to hold this item over until next month's meeting.
I move that we hold item 1 over till next month's meeting.
I second.
There's a motion and a second to hold over until the next meeting. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Roll call. Bynum?
Aye.
Bryant?
Aye.
Walters? Aye. Townsend?
Aye.
McKiernan?
Aye. Thank you. We'll see you in a month.
All right.
Item number 2 is a presentation on a debt policy revision, and that will be presented by our CFO, Kathleen Von Atchen.
Good evening and Happy New Year.
Thank you.
So tonight we're going to talk about the debt policy. Just as a reminder, we have about 15 or so different financial and budgetary policies, all of which are on our website under the Finance Department page. And we've recently updated about 10 of these policies. And tonight we're looking at one. It's the debt policy. It involves all of the debt issued by the unified government, including the Board of Public Utilities. Now, the reason we're revising this policy is, if you remember back about 10 years ago, during the financial crisis, there were many municipalities at that time who found themselves to be in a little bit of trouble managing their debt portfolios. And not only that, but municipal bond investors, they were really asking for additional transparency because there just wasn't a lot of information that they could get. And so as a result, Congress reacted by passing the Dodd-Frank bill. And there was a lot of different congressional direction to improve the transparency of the municipal bond market and how municipalities manage their debt. So in the spirit of that, I've reviewed the existing debt policy, which is about 4 pages, and it is very concise and provides a lot of direction and good. But what I've done is pretty much rewritten the entire policy so that it has, it basically documents all of our current practices, and it's much more comprehensive and provides the reader with more information on some of the jargon and more technical terms, etc. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, I'm going to just tonight talk about, just kind of walk you through the 20-page policy. I'm not going to go into detail. There's a lot of information here, but just to give you a general overview of what's in there. And then what I recommend, this is a information-only presentation. What I recommend, if all of you committee members are willing or think it's a good idea, for us perhaps to meet with you individually to talk about what kind of debt limits you see and just kind of get some general input from you individually so we can bring all that back forward to you and present it to the public at the March or the February meeting. All right. So briefly, I just wanted to walk through this a little bit. The first page is just an introductory page that talks about what the policy is, what the purpose of the policy is, the fact that it follows Government Finance Officers Association standards, and then also kind of outlines where all our debt is detailed in the comprehensive annual financial report. The debt policy itself, there's 4 purposes for having a debt policy, and so what we've set here is that it sets the parameters for issuing and managing our debt. It provides guidance to decision makers related to debt affordability. It documents our post and pre and post issuance, and it provides some objectivity on how to approve debt decision making, and then facilitates the actual financing process, right? Just to give you a little bit, as I mentioned, we're including the Board of Public Utilities debt in this because the Board of Public Utilities is an administrative agency of the unified government by charter. So in fact, we issue the BPU's debt. My office does. Of course, we work very closely with Lori Austin, the CFO at the BPU, and all of the board members and other senior managers over there. And so Lori Austin has reviewed this policy and bought off. She's good with this. I've also gained input from our from our bond counsel and from our municipal advisor at Springstead and Associates. So There are four borrowing purposes, four purposes for borrowing, and so I've talked about each of these. Mainly meant the most important one that we often think of is long-term capital improvements. The second one is for essential vehicle and equipment needs. We typically borrow for larger equipment using lease financing mechanism, which we've brought forward to you before, and the previous policy didn't really talk about that a lot. The third purpose is for economic development needs, and the last is to refinance our existing debt when we're able to. All right. So generally speaking, we have criteria for determining the feasibility of issuing debt and how that impacts. The first is the nature of the product and the use of the funds. And so one thing that we're going to be correcting, because there's a little bit of an edit here, is that these 3 points, A, B, and C, are actually the criteria for analyzing the cost-benefit analysis of the project. So I'm going to do a little cut and paste of these 3 items and put them right here under B, just so you know. So the third item is cost-benefit analysis. And what we do, and we do this currently, is we determine the benefit of the project. That has to be defined, and we quantify how much in terms of monetarily how much that benefit is, and we validate the assumptions and the risks. We also we determine the cost of the project. We make sure that the basis of the estimate is accurate, and then we finally, marry or compare those two to determine whether there's a benefit, but then also what kind of operating impacts are resulting from that project. So for example, right now we're building the new juvenile center. What's going to cost to operate that facility? Is it greater than the amount that we're currently spending? That kind of thing. The third item that we look at is an expenditure plan. What we're looking at is, how long is this capital project going to take us to build? And when and how much within the next future years are we going to spend down those bond proceeds? So we're looking at that too. And then the last item is just making sure that revenue, if there's any revenue generated from the project, such as economic development projects, that we make sure we match that revenue with the debt repayment plan. We also look at the asset life. So generally speaking, we closely match the repayment period with the economic life of the asset. For all our bond, most of our bond issues get a credit rating, and those that we feel are not going to have a favorable rating, typically unproven revenues in economic development projects, warrant not getting a credit rating, and in those instances we don't pursue that. But this policy kind of talks about credit ratings and how we go about making that decision, and what kind of items are often looked at by the credit rating agencies in them determining our rating. So the credit rating process, we would like to think that it's very, very objective, but in reality, the credit rating analysts look at a whole myriad of metrics. And then they also introduce some subjectivity, having background and knowledge of our community. So it's so the credit rating process is pretty involved. So generally we issue quite a few different types of financing instruments, and so this policy provides an opportunity for you to read and find out what each one of those are. And so we are clearly defining those. We got, of course, general obligation bonds, we have lease revenue bonds, temp notes, lines of credit or bank loans, lease purchase financing, often for equipment. And then we also enter into obligations with our state and federal government partners through various loans. And the economic development obligations there's what I'm calling special district financings, and those include the community improvement districts, the transportation development districts, sales tax and revenue districts, your STAR, as well as TIF. Well, I'm going to add TIF in here. So quite a few different mechanisms for financing economic development. And then the last category is conduit debt. That's debt that is not an obligation of the unified government, but we issue the debt on the behalf of the developer. That type is industrial revenue bonds, so we issue those as well. And so there's a detailed explanation of those. So I think most of, a lot of interest it has been focused on how much debt or should the unified government undertake, and debt affordability questions. And so those sorts of questions are answered in this section 4, which is the debt ratio guidelines. And what I've provided here generally is a basis for an introductory discussion on what we want to set as a policy, as a commission, as a governing body for the types of limits we want to place on the organization, bearing in mind that issuing debt is a means of investing in our community by replacing aging infrastructure with new improvements. So the debt ratios need to be broken up by the type of debt instrument or that we're using. So in this instance, we have proposed potential metrics for general obligation debt, for general fund supported debt, and then for revenue or economic development financing debt. So in this presentation, or this policy, the general obligation debt, what we're recommending is that we monitor our debt affordability by looking at debt per capita, which is the amount of debt per resident or population. And what we're really focusing on here is only general obligation bonds that are backed by the full faith and credit of the general fund. And so we're not including general obligation bonds which are issued on behalf of the sewer or other enterprises. So we've specifically isolated that so that we're only looking at those general obligation bonds that pay for capital improvements related to our general government, that's street and many other kind of public infrastructure improvements that are not generating revenue, like the sewer and the storm. And the second metrics we're using is debt as a percentage of assessed value. Because these general obligation bonds, their primary repayment source is a property tax mill rate, it seems appropriate to balance that affordability, or look at the affordability of that of this type of debt with the assessed value of our community. Okay. The second one is general fund supported debt. Now, as you know, there are a number of economic development projects which have what they call an annual debt appropriation clause. And that's because in prior years, the revenues that were expected from the economic development project being undertaken had not been proven. And so it became difficult to convince investors that we actually felt these revenues were going to be realized, and they felt they needed to have some other additional pledge with the general fund backing. And so we have a number of bond issues outstanding where there is a general fund backing. In the future, we would like to limit that amount because it places an obligation on the unified government's operations. So as a result, we have included two debt ratios in this category. The first is a general debt ratio, where it looks at the annual debt service or lease payments as a percentage of the total general fund expenditures. And we're recommending that be held at 10%. That's what that line here. But in addition, the unified government also has outstanding long-term liabilities in its pension and other post-employment. And so in order to really get a full understanding of our ability to pay, our debt affordability, we have a second ratio that folds in the calculation of the first ratio, where we have all our debt payments, plus the annual contribution that we make towards in the general fund for our pension and other post-employment. And then we divide that by the debt outstanding, by the total general fund expenditures. And we're setting that percentage at 25%. So when the credit rating agencies increasingly are looking at whether our funding status with our pensions and OPEB. So having this in our policy is going to be very beneficial. As we meet individually, we will be looking at figures to demonstrate where we are sitting with once we do these calculations, and then we'll present some of that information to the full committee next month. The last one is, of course, I just want to point out that we just have a quick sentence in here about overlapping debt. There is a requirement in all our bond documents that we also show the amount of debt that jurisdictions or entities within our boundaries are also issuing. So from the school districts and the community college and so forth. So all of that debt from those other jurisdictions are also an obligation that are paid for from revenues from our taxpayers. So that's also looked at. Now, revenue bonds, which are those sewer and others, and economic development, those typically have very known and established ratios. And what they do is they look at all the operating income minus operating expenses, which is what they call net income, and they match that against how much in debt service we're paying, or they're paying. And so they call that a net coverage ratio. Typically, the coverage ratio is if your income is 1.5 or 1.3% of your debt service, then you're doing pretty good. So these coverage ratios are very standard, and we often include them in our bond documents. We're not really recommending ratios specifically, but they're kind of driven by the market and the marketability of the bonds. So investors require these certain standards be established, and so that's part of the bond approval process. The remaining portion of this policy is just documenting our current processes. For example, the terms of the debt. You know, by statute, general fund or general obligation bonds can only be 20 years, but lease revenue bonds and revenue bonds can go out 30 years. So we've just provided a range here. Rapidity of the debt payment. So how quickly do we pay the payment? Do we make it an annual amount that's fixed every year? Or do we pay just a little at the beginning and then lump it at the end? That's what's called backloading. And what we're recommending is that we're not necessarily saying that we don't want to do or banning backloading, but we do want to do backloading only under specific criteria, which are listed here, because backloading increases the total interest cost of the bonds. You know, when we issue bonds, we have a lot of different decisions to make that deal with the serial bonds, the term bonds, capital appreciation bonds, and those are all decisions that are made by the financial advisor or municipal advisor and myself in order to improve the marketability of the bonds. So that's all kind of detailed and discussed here. Typically, our portfolio doesn't have any variable interest rates right now. It's all fixed. But if there is a project where the use of variable rate makes sense, then this policy would allow that, and so we have that in there. Whether, you know, right now we have an issuer rating. So when we talk about the UG rating, it's the issuer rating. It's the just the ability of the entire organization to meet its obligations. So, but sometimes we can also get credit ratings for individual debt instruments, right? So when we in the future go out for sewer revenue bonds, we're going to get a sewer revenue bond or sewer enterprise rating, and that's what's talked about here is getting different ratings. In the past, if there's an economic development project where we can get a rating, we're going to get a rating just on that project. Credit enhancements is something that has been done in the past. It's not being done it's not as common anymore, but it basically allows the government to enter into an insurance policy with a bond insurer, and that bond insurer basically is guaranteeing or promising that debt service will be paid. They're promising that to investors, and as a result, it increases the rating from some lower rating to AAA, and as a result, reduces the interest cost. That's an insurance tool that is really not widely used anymore because the market's fallen out since the financial meltdown of 2009. So, but we left it in here because there may be a change in that market in the future. So general obligation bonds don't have debt reserves, but revenue bonds do. And of course, we're trying to facilitate a debt policy for all types of bond issuances, including the BPU. So a lot of revenue bonds required debt reserve and surety policies. This basically allows you borrow enough to set aside 1 year, basically, let's say 1 year's worth of debt service in a fund where it earns interest, and if the bond issue runs into trouble, then you can tap that reserve for repayment. Another thing that often happens is that we build a project. It takes 3 or 4 years to build it, but we have to issue the money because we need the money to pay for the construction. So what we do is we add in the interest costs for those first 2 or 3 years, or 1 through 3 years where we're building the project. We add that interest to the amount we're borrowing, so that in the future we can, and then in the future at year 4, let's say, then the interest includes all the project interest as well as the amount that we expected to pay in years 1 through 3, for example. So there's just a policy on that. Another area that we don't often talk about is call options and redemption. Typically GO bonds, as I mentioned here, are issued for between 20 and 30 years, and all those bond issues have typically call options at year 10 with no premium. So this improves the marketability of the bonds. I know that so there's a lot of conversation about paying off debt early. Oh, let's pay off debt early, but because of these call provisions, we're not really able to pay off debt early until we reach that year 10. So which is typically the call option date. Now the reason these are put on bond issues is because investors don't want to have that risk of having to reinvest their investment. They don't want to have the risk of having to find another instrument to reinvest their money when it gets called. And so that's what they're looking for, is that assurance that they'll be able to buy that and keep it in their portfolio for the full 10 years. So the other items, method of sale, I did want you to point out that typically we decide between a competitive sale or pursuing a negotiated sale. So with any bond issue, we decide, is this bond issue going to be difficult to sell. If it is, if there's a lot of additional information we're going to have to provide to investors, then we may decide to pursue a negotiated sale. If it's just straightforward general obligation bond, then we do a competitive sale. So that's that just outlines that. In addition, I talked briefly about doing private placements where there aren't any underwriters, or there's only one underwriter for a bond issue instead of a whole myriad of underwriters or investors. So, you know, here the rest of the policy talks about different disclosures that we are required to make, as well as the approval process. You know, the approval process involves a whole myriad of people, including myself, the chief legal counsel, our bond counsel, our municipal advisor, and then we get to the state of Kansas also reviews all our bond issues, and of course the Unified Governments Commission and Mayor approves all the bond issues. So everyone is looking at all these documents, and includes a lot of people. So. And then I just wanted to point out this, we didn't really have this written out anywhere, but how we select the financing team and how they're compensated is all detailed in here as well. And then the last thing is for some of that jargon that we have, or maybe if there's some information, or yeah, so if there's any words that you're not sure what they mean or what the definitions are, we have added a section at the very end. It's a little slow. Section at the very end that has a glossary that with lots of terminology that's been defined here. So that's all I have for tonight, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity to ask me any questions, or I would encourage that we set up separate meetings so we can talk in more detail about some of these items. I enjoy your feedback.
Any questions or comments from the committee?
I have just a couple brief questions. Did I see anything in our policy about temp notes?
So I'm happy to add temp notes to, there is a definition on temp notes. It talks about what they are. Yeah. Yeah, here it is right here.
Right.
Yeah.
So it says, well, we can talk about this at our one-on-ones, but it sounds like the UG may or may not issue temp notes for projects. Is that what that says? You may choose to issue temp.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So it's our option to.
Yes, that's right.
My second comment is just, you know, as we talk about transparency, I would really like to figure out a way to get on a single sheet of paper all the debt values that you talk about in this policy. And one I hadn't really thought about until you mentioned it, and that's all the unfunded benefit go forward debt. I guess you would call it debt. It's certainly an obligation. But anyway, it would be really nice to be able to summarize that on one single sheet so that we as commissioners could sort of monitor that from year to year. And you could advise us more clearly on where we stand on some of these ratios and coverages and things like that. That's all I had.
Happy to do that. I did want to, page 59 of the CAFR has all the unified government's long-term liabilities. So what it presents is the outstanding balance on the first day of the fiscal year, any additions, deletions, and then the outstanding balance on the last day of the fiscal year. So it includes the BPU, the pension, the retiree health, all of our economic development, all the general fund funded backed debt, the general obligation, the sewer, everything. So, and
Not the temp notes.
not the temp notes, because the temp notes are not a long-term liability. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
I do have one, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
Good
Commissioner
evening, Ms.
Townsend.
Bonanchin. Thank you. As I review this again and listening to what you said this evening, the strikeouts remove what is no longer a policy. Is that it? So
that's right.
What you presented here for further comment. Excuse me. Excuse me. Is a review of what our current policy is, correct? Minus the strikeouts.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of, well, for the most part. See, the strikeouts are the current policy. All the blue area is new policy. But I have to qualify that much of the policy that is new and blue that I wrote in there documents our existing practices. So I would say that the actual only difference in or change in our current practices is found in section 4, which talks about the debt guidelines. Yeah. Do you understand?
Okay. All right.
Debt
thank
ratio
you.
guidelines.
And that was going to be my one comment, is that with this policy, as with many others, I think you've done a nice job of documenting, putting into a document what has been and still is our standard practice, our operating procedure. And so it's nice to have it so documented. So thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like there are no other questions, so we will consider this and we'll have the opportunity for individual meetings, and then you'll bring this back next month for consideration by this committee.
Right.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that takes us to item number 3 on our committee agenda tonight, and that is a report on the Small Business Grant Program that was started a couple of years ago, and Shea Lockett, our Small Business Liaison, will present that report.
Good evening. As Commissioner stated, this is an update on our small business grant that we house in the Economic Development Department. And before we get into the grant, I wanted to update you all on some of the goals that we've set for the Small Business Liaison. As you're aware, the Small Business Liaison is a newly created position in the 2018 fiscal year. And the goals for that position, which is my position, is to increase the number of small businesses in Wyandotte County, particularly the urban core, and to make the unified government a positive resource for small business, to make Wyandotte County the friendliest small business community in the metro, and to increase the awareness and utilization of business tools available through the unified government, which include our NRA, Land Bank, and Small Business Grant. These goals were set by our department after meeting with several small businesses and hearing some of their concerns and some of their needs. So we set these as our target goals for the Small Business Liaison. The Small Business Grant, in line with the Small Business Liaison, the goal is to assist the existing small businesses with 100 or fewer employees that are primed for expansion or moving to the next level in business growth, and to target areas. The target areas include our downtown corridor and our older urban areas of KCK. So it's specifically for businesses that are looking to grow within specific areas of Kansas City, Kansas. We have 2 grant types, which are commercial lease rate subsidy, and that lease rate subsidy can be for up to 6 months, and it can be no more than $10,000. And then the cost related to expansion, purchase, or lease which is what most of our grants are falling under, which are small businesses that are either moving into new buildings, they're expanding, they need new equipment and things like that. This is just a picture of one of our 2018 grant recipients, KCK Dental Professionals. They're currently on Minnesota, but they also purchased a new business, a new building located at 731 Minnesota Avenue, and they are going to be expanding their business. They'll keep their current location, and then they'll do some specialty services out of this building. And we thought it was important that we point out the ineligible grant uses. Home-based businesses, liquor stores, bars and establishments that sell alcohol with less than 50% in food sales, seed capital and new businesses, and those that do not create any jobs are not eligible for the small business grant, because the purpose of the grant is to increase the number of jobs we have in our community and to help those that are growing, those businesses grow. Our program funding initially was through the Unified Government Industrial Revenue Bonds issuance fees, but recently the program was funded through our annual budget, and it is $50,000 budgeted annually. Yes.
So going back to that then, so why the switch? Is there variation or fluctuation in the IRB issuance fees? And was this attempt to just make it a more solid and dependable amount of money?
From my understanding, the purpose was to make it a solid, reliable amount that we knew we had from year to year.
And so do the IRB issuance fees then defray a portion of this from economic development budget? Are they still coming in as one source of funding for this program? If not, what's happening to them now?
That would be...
Are we not issuing IRBs as much anymore, or?
So, I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
So it says that previously, and when we first brought this up, it was
Yes.
funded through IRB issuance fees.
Yes, that's
We'd
right.
come back in, and we thought this was a great way to invest those fees back into developing small businesses. Now it says that's not the case, or it's funded by a portion of the yearly economic development budget. So my question is, what's happening to the IRB issuance fees? Are we not issuing as many IRBs and therefore not getting as many fees? Are those fees going somewhere else in our cash flow and our budget? I'm just curious why the change.
I can grab this, Kathleen.
Oh, right.
Catherine Carter, Interim Director of Economic Development. It is, in a roundabout sort of way, you could probably say that it is still being supported by the IRBs, but in reality, the IRB issuance fee is going into the general fund, and then this is just being taken directly from the general fund. I think there was a concern of tying those two together due to the fluctuations.
So this smooths out the fluctuations. Perfect. Yep. Thank you. That's all I needed.
Can I ask you, or can I add to that for a moment? So actually in our debt policy I was just presenting, there's also language to allow us to charge developers for the cost of staff time for what it took to issue special obligation debt. And so we're actually going to be augmenting the revenue collection related to not only industrial revenue bonds, but also bonds that we issue on behalf of, to recover our costs, that we issue for economic development projects. So, for example, the Legends apartment complex, that was a project that staff worked on for about 2 years, and we weren't able to recover all of our time for that. So that's one thing that we're going to do.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is just a quick overview of the application process. When a business is interested in the small business grant, they'll submit their application and the required documents, which include a year of their previous year's tax statements, a certified copy of what it is that the grant funds will be going to. If it's equipment, it'll be an invoice for the equipment costs and things of that nature, as well as their W-9s to be for repayment, and They submit all those documents to our office. We'll review the application and documents. At that time, we set up an interview with the applicant, and based on the interview, we score them on a point matrix, which is set up in the grant application. And if the business qualifies, then we forward a memo to administration for approval. Based on approval, then we notify our finance department of their grant amount, and then we notify business and obtain required signatures for them to receive the grant. And just some information on 2018. I think it's important to note that the business outreach began in May of 2018. It was not the entire year, but I was able to meet and speak with over 60 businesses. We had 11 applications submitted, 5 were approved, 2 did not meet the requirements, and 4 were denied due to lack of funding. And I think that it's important to note that even after those 4 were denied, there were several other businesses who inquired about applying for the grant, but they were notified that all the funds for the year had been allocated to other businesses. And those businesses were encouraged to reapply in 2019 if they were still interested. These are our 2018 grant recipients: Dolores Home Training Center, Miguel's Catering, KCK Dental Professionals, Union Press, and Big Grill and More. And it lists out the amount they were given and what the grant is used for. Yes.
So this is funded on basically a first come, first meet the criteria basis, right?
Currently, yes.
And so I really appreciate the fact that you have stepped up your efforts to make sure that as many small businesses as possible are aware of the existence of this and have the opportunity to get in early.
Right.
Because one of the concerns, I think, has always been that we make sure this is broadly available and broadly communicated across the entire community so that everyone has a fair opportunity to get in. So I appreciate that you've really stepped that up this year.
Thank you. And then I wanted to update you all on some of our 2019 initiatives that we're really excited about. We recently signed a contract with SourceLink Pro, which is a customer relations management system for us to be able to track our data and interactions with our business owners. For most of 2018, we were keeping records, but it wasn't to the degree that SourceLink Pro can. It's a database that allows us to communicate with the business owners, to be able to send out mass emails, to be able to directly refer them to resources. And we have our signed contract, and hopefully we'll be getting trained on it and up and running in February. And then the next thing is our new marketing campaign, to the point that we want all of our businesses to know about our small business initiatives and know that the unified government supports local businesses. We are starting a WICO Loves Local campaign, and we will be working with a local graphic designer to design our marketing materials. And this will be an opportunity for us to highlight various small businesses throughout Wyandotte County. We'll work with our MBRs and governing bodies to get different businesses, the information out to different businesses as well as staff. And then we're also looking to modify our small business grant requirements. As you can see, there's a great demand for the grant, and as we get more small businesses that are moving to Wyandotte County and Kansas City, Kansas, we want to make sure that our guidelines and parameters are set up so that all businesses have an equal opportunity to receive grant funding. So we are looking to make revisions to our grant process. And that is all that I have.
Commissioner Bryant.
So it looks like every applicant applied for the max and received.
Yes.
Did you have any applicants that came along later that requested less than $10,000?
Every applicant has requested $10,000, and pretty much most of them qualify based on the point matrix for $10,000, which is one of the things that we would like to look at possibly changing.
Okay.
And any other beyond the 5? Yes.
Any other comments or questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Good evening, Ms. Lockett. I think the presentation zeroes in what a difference it makes to have a person dedicated in the department to moving forward with this type of service to the community, targeting small businesses. So that leads me to the question about definition. Since one of the goals is to increase small business, how are we defining a small business for the purposes of this program? Because we won't know if we've increased any over what we've had until we know how we're defining small business. That's the first question.
Small businesses are currently defined as a business with 100 or fewer employees, and that is also one of the things that we would look to possibly change in our near future, because that encompasses the majority of our businesses in Wyandotte County.
Where are we getting that 100 from? Is that some designation by the Small Business Administration? Somehow I had a number a lot less than that in mind, but that's why I'm asking the question, so that we all are reading off the same page.
This is Catherine Carter. Yes, Commissioner Townsend, we completely agree that the 100 or fewer has been attached to the grant program, I believe, since its inception. But one of the things that we've been talking about, and indeed what Ms. Lockett has been kind of focused on in terms of her outreach, has actually been more in line with the SBA number, which is 20 or fewer employees. And we think that revision, or potentially having a couple different tiers, might help actually get the grant funding to the people who are most in need of trying to expand their businesses.
I think that's important because, like I said, 100 was not the number I had in mind, and I think that would not be. I think it was Commissioner McKiernan that used the term fairness, and what we're really talking about here, and who we're trying to target to help. So I'd like to see us hone in a little bit more specifically on what we're defining, or who we're defining as small businesses. Second thing, is there any limitation in our current procedure? I can't remember that we put one in on the number of times a company could come to us for a grant. Is it one and done, or once every 5 years, or have we talked about that at all?
The grant currently reads that it's a one-time only grant.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you again. Those were the questions that came to mind as I heard the presentation. And again, congratulations to you and the department for moving in a direction targeting this segment of the business population, our community specifically. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bynum?
I don't have a question after all, thanks.
Okay. Well, I have spoken with, I think, 3 of the grant recipients, not only from this year, but from previous years, all who have substantially fewer than 20 employees and definitely meet that criterion, and all have said to me that the availability of this grant made a substantially positive impact in their ability, in one case, to establish the business, and in 2 other cases, to expand the business and the number of people employed by the business. So it would seem that we are beginning to achieve those goals that we set out at the very beginning. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, that is the last item of business on our agenda this evening. We are adjourned.